thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I think it's really important that the users of the forecast get some kind of voice as well. And I wanted to present the use of GloFAS within the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement today. So I'm an associate professor at the University of Reading, where I lead the Fathom project, which aims to undertake interdisciplinary research to support anticipatory humanitarian action. At Reading, we're also partners in the development of the GloFAS system, and we've had a number of PhD students and postdocs who've been working to support GloFAS. Within the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre, I'm the science lead for Anticipatory Humanitarian Action. So I support the development of the forecast triggers and early action protocols for this anticipatory humanitarian action. So within humanitarian organisations, there has been recognition of the value of weather and climate forecasts for enabling actions to be taken before a disaster strikes. Financing is now available from a number of different sources to support such actions, for example, from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies DREF mechanism, the UN's SURF mechanism, and also from the START network. So today I will be talking from the perspective of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, where the funding is released on the basis of predefined forecast triggers that have been robustly evaluated. So today I would really like to thank members of the Fathom team who have really contributed towards today's presentation, and particularly on recent efforts to swiftly evaluate the new version of these GloFAS forecasts and get around some of the technical challenges of dealing with this new version as well. So first of all, I wanted to start off with why the Red Cross Red Crescent movement is using global forecasts to take action locally. Well, ideally, we would always use the local forecast capacity, but there are situations where global systems, especially GloFAS, is useful. So one example would be in Uganda, where GloFAS, global hydromet forecasts, are being used as an interim solution where, because Uganda doesn't currently have flood forecasting capacity. So while the local capacity is being developed, we've been working with the Ministry of Water and Environment to evaluate the GloFAS forecasts. And it's really important to us to have that co-production between the global hydromet teams and the local mandated agencies, because we recognise that that local hydrological expertise is very important for making sure that these global models are usable and useful at the local level. We also then enable a bit more local ownership over that decision-making process. There's also the situation where global hydromet forecasts are used for longer lead times, for example, in Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, the Flood Forecasting and Warning Centre have forecasts out to 5 days, but the humanitarian organisations would like to be able to make decisions at longer lead times. And we know that to run these models with ensemble rainfall forecasts really needs that centralised computational power. So GloFAS is able to support at those longer lead times. As I mentioned earlier, robust evaluation of the forecast is required before they can be used to trigger the release of funds for anticipatory action. We use the GloFAS reforecast datasets to assess the skill, comparing with gauge data where it's available, or in some cases where it's not available, using databases of recorded flood impacts. From different flow thresholds and different probabilities of that flow, we calculate a contingency table from which we can evaluate things that are important to us within the planning for anticipatory action. So, for example, we look at the false alarm ratio. This gives us an indication of how often we might act in vain and release funds that were not entirely necessary. We also think about the probability of detection of events, and this is becoming increasingly important to us as more national societies turn to forecast for preparedness actions. We really need to communicate to national societies that there will be situations where flood events happen that are not forecasted. We're also interested in the frequency of the trigger as well. This gives us an indication, if we've got a fund that we're drawing down from, how often that funds will have to be released for action. So it supports the management of that fund. So we know that every time that there's a change in the model version, and in particularly where there's a large change, we need to be able to reassess the skill, and also we need to change the thresholds that we're using. We're using GloFAS based on the model climatology. So we're not interested in what the actual flow will be, but how extreme it is for the model. So we're really relying on those 5-year return period, 10-year return period thresholds from the GloFAS system. So here I've got a map of, in pink, you can see the countries where GloFAS is already in use as part of a trigger or as the whole trigger, and the purple countries where GloFAS is currently in investigation for use. So there's 6 countries already where GloFAS is part of an approved and contracted early action protocol. And in some countries, there's already been a release of funds. So in Bangladesh, last year, there was a trigger for funds based on GloFAS. There's also been some work in Zambia as well and elsewhere. So early action protocols now cover the release of up to 350,000 Swiss francs in each early action protocol. So from those forecast triggers, which include GloFAS for some of the flood triggers. So we really have to make sure that that new version of the model is up to scratch so that we're not using those funds inappropriately. Additionally, I should mention that the UN SURF mechanism has also used GloFAS. Last year, it triggered over $5 million release of funds in Bangladesh to support anticipatory humanitarian action, which was based on the combined GloFAS and local flood forecasting and warning centre forecast models. So I just wanted to present an example of the sort of evaluation that we've been doing from both the old and the new GloFAS models. So this work has been undertaken by Andrea Ficki and Harshita Gupta from the University of Reading in the last few weeks to update the forecast triggers in Uganda on the back of this release of the new model version. So as Christelle mentioned earlier, the first thing to update are the thresholds used within the model. So for example, where we've used a 5-year return period threshold in GloFAS 2.1, we need to update that for GloFAS 3.1. The plot on the bottom right, which you'll note is actually a logarithmic scale, shows the change to the thresholds in GloFAS. And actually, in this case, we can see that all of the thresholds in GloFAS 3.1 are higher than in 2.1. So if we didn't change them, we would end up triggering action way too frequently. So from the initial evaluation and discussions with the technical working group in Uganda, we decided on a 70% chance of a flood occurring at a 5-day lead time. That's our trigger threshold. So we've had to evaluate the model at a flow threshold actually less than that, because to get a sample size large enough for evaluation, we can't use the actual 5-year or 10-year return periods that are used across Uganda. So we've evaluated the false alarm ratio and probability of detection, here plotted for GloFAS 2.1 against GloFAS 3.1. So what this shows us is that in general, though not everywhere, there is an improvement to both the false alarm ratio and the probability of detection. And actually for us, this means that 2 extra stations have enough skill for incorporation into the early action protocols. So actually with GloFAS 3.1, we'll be able to take action in even more communities. So here is a plot for the Brahmaputra River at Bahadurabad in Bangladesh. This is the location where UN SURF and the Red Cross Red Crescent movement have been triggering forecast-based action. We've been asked in particular to look at whether we can extend the lead time for those actions. So we need to look at whether GloFAS is good enough at longer lead times. Previously, we were taking action at the 10-day lead time, but they would like to start pushing that back to 12 days or perhaps even further. In this case, we're looking at a 50% chance of a 95th percentile flow. So that's what has been evaluated here. In bold colors, you can see the probability of detection. In the dashed line, you can see the false alarm ratio. So we can see here that 2.1 actually has better false alarm ratios and probability of detection at the shorter lead times, out to about 10 days. from 10 days to 15 days, roughly similar, but actually 3.1 starts performing better at 15 days. So we can see that 3.1 might give us those longer lead times, but perhaps we need to have some more caution using 3.1 at the shorter lead times. Nevertheless, on this large river, both versions of GloFAS have good predictive skill, and it's proving to be a really valuable forecast product used by the anticipatory agencies, but also by the Flood Forecasting and Warning Centre. And I should say that this work that's been undertaken at Reading is part of Sazad Hussein's PhD studentship, and he comes from the Flood Forecasting and Warning Centre in Bangladesh. So we have a direct link there between the GloFAS development and the national hydromet agencies. So I think this work gives an indication of how we're using GloFAS within the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, and we are continuing to reevaluate these new forecasts across all countries where it's being used or will be used. And I think we have an understanding that in some locations, as we can see in Uganda, that 3.1 is providing better and more usable forecasts for us, but we're aware that in some locations this might not be the case, and it's very important for us to be able to reevaluate it everywhere. So I'd just like to say thank you once again for listening and for inviting me to talk today. You've got my email addresses there if you'd like to contact me. The R package that was being used to evaluate these forecasts is something that's being developed at the University of Reading by Andrea Ficchi, and it is available on request if you want to undertake that GloFAS evaluation. It is specifically set up to support the development of the forecast triggers within the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, but I think it could be applied more broadly elsewhere. And just to say as well, we'd welcome any further improvements in GloFAS and would like to be involved in all of those conversations to help guide them. Thank you very much. And over to Lydia now, who will be presenting the Anticipation Hub to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Christelle, for the opportunity to co-host this really great webinar with the Anticipation Hub. So many names I'm seeing which are familiar. Many of our partners are here, so it's great to see you all here. But for those who are less familiar, let me just give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the Anticipation Hub. So this is a platform for knowledge exchange, learning, and interaction on anticipatory action, which is supporting policymakers, practitioners, and scientists. And it is hosted by the German Red Cross in collaboration with the IFRC and the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre. And we have over 74 partners from across different research institutes, universities, UN agencies, NGOs, governments. It's really broad network, also including hydromet agencies. And we're really excited to have ECMWF as one of our partners and the University of Reading, who've been very actively contributing to different content on the hub. So please do visit the Anticipation Hub, explore our different learning resources, sign up to our newsletter, including one of the blogs that I just posted in the chat as well. And please do join our working groups. We have one exciting one on Earth observation for anticipatory action hosted by NASA and the German Red Cross. So yeah, looking forward to continuing the discussion and interacting with you all to advance anticipatory action in practice. So thanks again, and I hand back over to Christelle.